I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and so if you can just holler your answers, if you have one, that would be great. If not, just look polite when the person next to you yells their answer. Measured by the word, the most lucrative kind of writing is still ransom notes. Just I'm updating you in case you wanted to know. That is still the case by word for word. So to make sure that the next few minutes are useful, I'd like to hear a couple of you at least tell me what your biggest frustration currently is when it comes to writing.
Marketing.
Yeah. Marketing, okay, yeah.
Selling.
I'm sorry? Selling, same thing? Okay, what else? Just want to make sure we're dealing with it. Everybody else is just
Time.
time, okay, time to write?
Yes,
Cool.
without interruptions, because I get interrupted all the time.
Okay, right? Sell the cat and the children. Okay, great. Somebody else? Frustration? So writing's easy. That's great. That's good to know.
To get there.
Motivation.
Okay, motivation.
Transportation.
Okay, explain.
I can't drive.
So you need people to get you places. All right.
I've got books, I've got a sign maybe not quite as high as this flag. And I'm physically challenged and trying to get there.
Getting there. Okay, good.
Oh. Beta readers.
Because you've had bad ones or because you just can't find them?
Both.
All right. Beta readers. Raise your hand if you're a beta reader for anybody. Just put your hand up. Okay. Keep them up if you still have some reading capacity. Like,
If what?
if you still have some capacity, you could read for more people than you're reading for. I'm just trying to solve this problem really early. If you turn around and look, there's a couple of potential beta readers. Okay. Anybody else? Biggest current frustration when it comes to writing?
Getting my characters to talk to me.
Oh, that's so good. What's your first name?
Carl.
Carl's a plant for today. I appreciate that. Would kiss you, but that would create awkwardness. But thank you. Yeah. That's why they keep you pinned back here and surrounded by chairs so you won't run out and kiss people who ask the perfect question. Okay, in my coaching work, I coach executives on personal effectiveness, and what we always do is try to identify and then take a next step. Because everybody's got a next step no matter what, right? You're where you are, there's where you want to be, and the distance between the two is usually covered by steps. So today I just want to really quickly go over some next steps in 3 areas: audience, character development, and process. So that's your audience, your characters, thank you, Carl, and then your writing process. There's this really super important connection between your story and your audience, and it happens when you're not in the room, which is kind of a bummer when you think about it, because you could encourage people to see the connections, but really all they have to go on is your story, your words.
Yes.
And most often, you have to ask yourself, what is my audience looking for in my stuff? What do they come to me for? And there are probably a couple of things. Maybe enlightenment, escape, entertainment, humor, some kind of transport out of their reality. Stephen King says he always takes a book with him because he never knows when he's going to need an escape hatch. So if Stephen King is reading you, what do you bring to him that allows that escape hatch to be cool when he's in the DMV and he opens your book and starts to read? Do you have an idea, and have you ever written down what your readers look for from you? What you deliver? This is the start of a little bit of what might be called marketing thinking. I apologize for those of you that feel that when you are asked to market your work, it's like somebody puts you in a short dress and makes you stand on the corner and wave at passing cars. Because I know that's how some writers feel about marketing.
Especially Larry.
But of course,
Nobody wants
the big challenge, you guys, isn't really that someone would take your work or that somehow you would be overrun with fans. Anonymity is a problem. And that's what marketing addresses. For a lot of us, if we got to just tell our story to a group of people, like I could tell you my story, it's my favorite story, it's my story, right? And if I get to tell you that story, and you would just sit there and buy the story or pay me a lot of money to tell you the story, that's really what it comes down to. The work of your imagination has to connect to a reader at some point. That's all marketing is you're just connecting what you're working hard on with some people who would love to interact as your audience. The challenge with the audience is that we don't necessarily study them. We study our stuff. Robert Frost said a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. So what are the points where you start, and I think it's all art forms, where you give delight, where there's a certain amount of delight in your work as a reader gets into it, and then maybe the wisdom that comes after some time. I think that for me, it's important to just go ahead and list what the reader expects. Depends on genre, of course. There's some protocols, there's some things that they're expecting from you no matter what, right? And you're going to deliver on those things, and maybe you've got a little twist as well within your genre, a way that you're working at it. That stuff should be written down. There should be a piece of paper or several pieces of paper where you've said, kind of, this is my audience. I actually recommend buying a little whiteboard, drawing a stick figure, and making some notes about what your audience cares most about, what they look for in entertainment, what else they buy, what trends they tend to follow. Your audience is somewhat unique within your genre, so it's worth making those notes. It's funny, if you do that, and you're doing this on your own without any input at all, you can usually come up with a set of things that's pretty close to what your audience would agree with. We don't do that work because we don't really see the connection. I write in fiction and nonfiction. Most of my fiction stuff right now is for the stage, and I coach high school students both in acting and in writing for the stage. So a lot of my world, when it comes to fiction, is about dialogue. It's about someone who shows up, and the way they talk to other people tells the story and tells you about them and gives you an indication who you should be cheering for. What your audience would like to do, if I brought them all in here, is get you to pay a tiny bit more attention to them. And that includes beta readers and people who are critiquing your stuff, and maybe the mechanic that's fixing your car that you give a couple pages to and ask what he thinks. All of those people are an audience, a potential audience. Your reading audience has core values. They've got intention that goes with their life. They've got experiences that have shaped them. The big question is, are they like you? So let's look at that for a second. If they're like you, and then you can take everything that you feel about your work and assume that they think that too. And you may have already guessed that I feel like our readers have enough experience that's broader than ours or different than ours. We can't always count on them to be us. So there's a place where you get done writing a section, and maybe you get up and read it to your spouse, or you read it out loud to your cat, and you think, this is great stuff. Really great stuff. The cat's a hard read because if it's not food, really, how do you know, right? So, but you decide, the look on the cat's face says, this is compelling, engaging work that will transport me to a completely different level of reader. What I'm going to recommend that you do is get somebody to read it that speaks English, that actually says something out loud that you can write down. Raise your hand if you've been part of a critique. Your work has actually, you've read it out loud, had other people say stuff to you about it. Okay. A lot of brave folks. That's great. Have you ever been part of a critique where somebody said, I don't get this character. I'm not sure what he or she is doing in this situation. And immediately the writer spoke up to defend that section of their writing. I think there should be a gong that goes off in Writers League meetings when that happens. Some big, huge, loud gong that makes everybody shudder and tells the writer to shut up. You know why? That's not the time to rewrite their opinion. That's just the feedback. It's the only way we grow, you guys. Those of you that have been involved in a love relationship for more than 10 minutes know that feedback is how you grow. When someone says to you, you know, this could be holding you back, this thing that you do, or at least it's holding you back with me, or getting in the way of me trusting you, right? That's a fundamental theory that I have when it comes to helping people get better, is we get better by feedback. And if you don't want feedback, you're not getting better. Which is crushing when you think about it. Because you can go with your view, I'm already good. What do I need with feedback? Or you can listen to readers. And you may say, gosh, how do I know they're qualified? I mean, maybe they haven't read enough books, maybe they're not involved in my genre enough. They don't write. Why would they be qualified? Here's what it takes to be qualified. Literacy. Can they read? If they can read, they can give you feedback on how your characters, how your story lands with them. That is gold. Here's what you want to do. Read your stuff, or have somebody read your stuff, or pass out your stuff to be read. Take out a pen and bite your lip. And when somebody says, I don't get this transition, I don't get this character, I don't get this plot or this change of point of view, you write it down and smile and say, thank you so much for that. You may say, can you tell me more? Can you give me a little bit more feedback about what was confusing? When did it get confusing? When did you decide, I can't keep reading this? You guys know what your writing and my writing competes with? Everything else somebody could be doing with their time. Netflix, a Broadway show, a fight with the neighbor, a conversation with the same cat. Lots of stuff could be done at that same moment when they're reading your work. I don't know about you, but I want my stuff to be competitive. I'm going to read you a couple things, tell you a few stories from my book, which is not quite finished, not quite at a publisher, but it's a book on how you actually come across as a leader. It's called How You Land. And my theory here is just you have to get feedback. You have to get over yourself enough to get feedback. You have to recognize that when somebody says, I'm confused, that complaint has actually a wish underneath it. You know what that wish is? They want to not be confused. They want to be connected to your story, to your characters, and they find that they're not. So we give people sometimes a reason to set the book down just because we wouldn't rewrite that section. You know, where inexplicably the ballerina pulls out a machine gun and just empties the theater, and it wasn't a murder mystery, so we were wondering, how does this fit into the overall tone of the rest of the book? Some people feel cheated and they'll tell you that. Or they'll usually just say, I'm confused. Here's a little trick that you can use whether or not you're writing this week. Somebody says to you, I'm a little confused. I'm a little confused. It's 4 words like that. And the last 2 words they said were little and confused. You're listening to them, and so you look at them and say, little confused? And then they elaborate. Not, how could you be confused? You're a moron if you're confused. None of that. Just repeat the last couple words you heard and wait. And what will happen is the door will open for them to tell you exactly why they're confused and how it feels to be confused. It's called mirroring. Simple technique in negotiation. Say the last couple words you heard with a non-judgmental look on your face and let them elaborate, and they will. What they're worried you're going to do is take out a large stick and hit them. So when you just repeat a couple of words and wait, they are going to feel invited to tell you more. That works in writing, but it will really work with your spouse tonight. Just the last couple words, just say it, make eye contact, see what happens. It's a non-verbal, almost, invitation, that looks good, to say more, to jump in a little bit more. There's a really good chance the writer is nothing like you. They have some similarities, some background. Let me tell you a little story about that. We have 4 kids, and when our 2 oldest were young, Paige, the oldest, is 5, and her younger brother, Drew, is 3, and they were not getting along. And I mean, for like 17 days, they were not getting along, picking at each other. And we have in our house something called a chair and a half, which is not really very big, but it's the perfect place to put 2 little kids that are not getting along and make them sit together. We had done this in the past with Paige and Drew, and it hadn't really had an impact, so I decided to call on a higher authority, and I pulled up a chair in front of the chair and a half while the 2 of them were sitting there, very unhappy to be that close. And I read them a list that is actually from the Apostle Paul writing to the church, Galatians, which is the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. And I said, which of these, oh 2 young ones, do you think you should be working on right now? They look confused, so I repeated the list: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, goodness, and self-control. Drew spoke first. He's 3 years old. He said he felt like he could work on kindness and self-control. So all eyes slowly turned to Paige, who's 5, and she thought about it for several beats, and she said, I think I need to work on gymnastics. Here's the deal. Your audience is working on a totally different list than you often. And if you're not asking, if you don't find a way to talk to your audience, then you're just going to work on your list. And they're going to come up with a completely different answer.
All right.
Here's the thing you need to know about audiences. They are really interested in a story, but it's not your story. They're interested in their story. How do I know this? Well, I'm an audience member. I know what it's like to sit and watch some guy talk. If I don't say anything that relates to your story, you have already started to plan dinner in your head. And maybe plans for the weekend. And wondering if perhaps this time at Perkins you should get pie. The answer is yes. What do you really care about? Your story. How do I know that? Because you're selfish. Because I'm just like that too. If somebody doesn't connect to your story, especially the success part of your story, you tune them out because you've got other things to think about, don't you? You get on your phone, maybe you could communicate with somebody. You can spend this time better unless it's connected to your story, and your audience is the exact same way. So, when it comes to fiction, how many fiction writers do we have? Can you show hand? So predominantly fiction. Your reader is immediately wondering who to root for. Your characters don't have to be exactly like your reader, but they do have to be worthy of either rooting for or against, right away. It only makes your characters interesting if they know, if your reader knows right away that there's somebody to root for or to root against. And this is how you read fiction too. You get in and you think, I like this person, they're just quirky enough for me. I'm hoping this happens in their life. There's a little bit of foreshadowing going on. Have I read this story before in some other book? You know, you do all of that. You're doing all of that filtering. And what happens is we give them enough to root for a character or a situation and they stay. That's what happens. If we don't, they leave. They close the book. Because it's just not relating to their story. We're pretty good cheerleaders as an audience. But the fact is, if we don't have something to root for, we're not going to stay. So the key, when you're talking to your audience, I just want to make a recommendation. Please do not respond like someone slapped your baby, because that's not actually what happened. Here's what happened. They gave you a chance to get better. That's what happened. I'm part of a group of people that is working on kind of advanced feedback techniques. And you get personal feedback, not about your writing, about you personally, about how you come across as a person, your tone of voice, your hand gestures, your sense of humor, stuff we all take pretty personally. And you'll get somebody who will stand up and say something that is outrageously wrong, in no way true about you. And you know what you have to say to yourself? What way is it possibly true? Maybe there's a chance this is true. When you're doing that with readers, you are the least offensive person in the room. You're able to say, wow, I didn't intend that, but that's how it ran, that's how it hits you. And when you can do that, it really opens the door to feedback from all kinds of sources. You've got a real good idea that so-and-so is the hero of your book. But you've got people rooting for your villain like crazy. And this happens a lot. You're looking at your text and you think, why would they root for the villain? And it's because the villain is interesting. The villain has conflict. The villain is fighting for something. When I coach kids on specifically playing the villain, a lot of high school kids are trying to be just good kids. And so when you give them a role of a monster, of somebody who's really got some terrible backstory, they have trouble. And so I say, here's the deal. You want to play the villain as though they were the hero trapped in the wrong story. And you want to write your villain that way too. You want to write the villain like they are completely consistent within their system and they are heroic. They're just in the wrong story. And they're mad at everybody else. Right? There's something there, you guys. Conflict is really what drives our interest. We start rooting for people who have the right kind of conflict, an impossible challenge, who are in trouble or in love on page 1. And usually those are the same things because there's some trouble to the love, right? Recognize why people cheer and what they cheer for in your work. It will really help you. You want to be specific and ask your audience. Okay. Audiences are selfish. I just want to make sure you get that. And the reason you know that is because you're selfish as an audience member too. All right, I want to ask a question. Let me see. I'm gonna skip ahead here. If you're willing to listen to your audience, you can get better. I was I led a band for years, and so we'd get up and play, and we did covers. We did a whole bunch of different kinds of music. We did stuff we wrote. And these people who were regulars where we played would come up and say nice things. That's what you do. If you know the band, you say nice things. And I was a lead singer and acoustic guitar player, and so when they would come up to talk to me, I would tell them what we did wrong in the set. And the lead guitarist was a few years older than me, and he watched me do this over several nights, and finally he just leaned over and he said, when they come up to talk to you, they're not talking about you. They're talking about the experience they had with the music we played. Why are you getting in the way of their enjoyment? Why are you telling them not to enjoy it and pointing out the flaws? And I said, I don't know, wise lead guitarist, do you have an answer? And he said, yeah, you're insecure. You should just let them have the experience and say thank you. And I said, you think so? He goes, you should practice now. Tell me thank you for what I just said. I said, thank you. He goes, see, it's easy. There is a time to not get in the way of the experience. How many of you have had people read your stuff and see a whole lot more than you intended in your plot or your characters? Does that ever happen to you? I was in a master's class once and I wrote a short story, and there was a lady who said that I had incorporated everybody's book into my short story. She found a symbol. I was like, wow, that's a generous reader. Most readers are generous. You know why? Because they're working on their story. They're putting their story into your tale. That's what's going on. That's the reader experience. It's your reader experience too. If it comes close enough to your experience, or you can vicariously put yourself in the story, if you can root for somebody or something to happen, you're hooked. That's what's going on. Most of us don't talk to audiences near enough. If we did, we would learn a lot of generous, cool stuff is happening, and somebody has decided that your novel actually is a critique of the current political system and is a must-read for everybody. Don't argue with that. Let them buy it. Let them read it. Let them read it at a national convention if that's what needs to happen. No big deal. You can just stay silent. It's okay. The generous reader will do that. They'll bring a bunch of stuff. Okay, so questions. That's my first section. So questions about making character development like this audience interaction like this work in your world. Who has questions? We're going to ask questions as we go. Doesn't sound practical. I'm already doing it.
Restate that.
What questions do you have about taking this approach to your audience, taking it and making it actually work in your world? Will this work in your world? If not, ask a question. Or if it will, then great, we'll just move on. Yes, Carl?
I guess I really don't know who my audience is.
What do you write?
What I've written doesn't actually fit one particular genre that I've been taught or
Okay.
told. It's historical fiction, but it doesn't actually, there's another element to it.
Okay.
So I'm not quite sure, I guess.
But at the very minimum, people who are interested in history, even if it's fictionalized, they're interested in the connection to human experience that resonates with history too. It's not just a work of fiction. There is some basis for it in our history, correct? Okay. And do you have people who give you feedback on that reading?
I've had a rather diverse, had a couple beta readers read it, and they focused less on the story and more on the punctuation. But the people who read it just purely to read it, they enjoy it.
Okay, if you're an editor, put your hand in the air, and I'm going to come to you in just a second. If you're an editor, put your hand in the air. Editors, I apologize now. Beta readers and editors are different. An editor can tell you what's wrong. A reader is actually a reader. And if you make them the same, they'll default to sometimes an editorial thing, because then it's about right and wrong. And that's great, but that's editorial, and I wouldn't do that initially. I'd initially get feedback on the story. So you need better beta readers. That would be that's what my 2 cents would be: get better beta readers, and ask somebody who's working in your genre to just give you a read of 10 pages and see what you get. Keep experimenting to get to where you need to be, which is, how does this actually land? Yes?
I was a beta reader, and I loved this.
What was your feedback like?
Well, I'm not sure. some things that, but the basic story I like.
Good.
I got confused a few times. So,
Cool.
but basically, I think it's a really good story.
Okay. So I always want to know, what's your favorite thing about this? What's the thing you read more than once because you liked it? And what is it? Now, what questions do you have for me?
This cover, it said everything.
Yeah.
The cover was great, and I think that I did get a little bit confused on some of his characters that he had. But generally speaking, I just like the story.
Yeah, okay.
I like this, the doctor being taken away from the civil war things and walking around in the woods and didn't know where he was. I think that was in these strange people found him. But with that, it ended up very good because I didn't know where he was. So I enjoyed reading it, and I hope I didn't. My bugaboo about writing was comics, so I hope I didn't say
Right.
anything.
Well, I tend to have a comma fetish too, so.
So part of the challenge there, though, is getting to a place where you're talking to people who read historical fiction enough that they know basically what that genre is about. That it's taking your modern sensibilities and going back in time. That it is time travel and being able to kind of sit, depending on point of view, in a character's mind who's involved in the Civil War. And some of those people will go to Manassas and walk the battlefields and, have that kind of moment because they're so connected to an era. They feel it's defining for the country, or they just, what it says about human experience, they really admire. And when you're writing historical fiction, you want to get to know that enough to find who are the other people that are doing it and trying to make this time travel possible. At the highest level in the genre, what are people doing? And like fantasy, it's a different world. It's an entirely different world. Whereas historical, you're trying to anchor it in real life. Other questions? Yes?
I'm not a writer, but I've heard of people using the Myers-Briggs profiles to create characters, conflicting characters especially, or developments in between.
Really?
Yes. In one of my psychology classes, they were explaining the Myers-Briggs profiles, and for example, like Sherlock and Moriarty, they're both the same, but of different types, and so those characters conflict, but they've got such personality similarities where you don't know who you're rooting for or who's doing what. And so when it comes to like character developments, I've tried to sit down and write characters, but I've struggled with the fact of like how they can interact with each other when they're not based on people I know. So
Okay, all right. So one suggestion is just add people to the room. Like you're making sausage and you just need to add more humans that you know and more interactions that you're aware of into that mix without having to just take one character out of your life and make it into something in fiction. Because you need more complexity and more conflict is really what it comes down to. You need them to come against something that will not move and somehow they make it move. I heard somebody speaking once and said, I coach people who have lived under a rock. Some big thing has happened to them, a horrible thing. And they made a choice not just to live with the rock, but to live under it. So his coaching is all about the rock stays, you get out from underneath it. And as a character, if you can give them a big enough rock that they have to crawl out from, your reader is immediately rooting for them. Because who doesn't have a rock, they have lived under a little bit, right? So there's common stuff when it comes to what you're fighting for. We're about to go right into that section in terms of character, but you need to get to that place where this is a pivotal moment. William Faulkner said in one of his novels, he would turn down a road that would take 18 years, and then he tells this whole story. And how many people who, when they're doing it, know that? But omnipotent third-person narration, you can do that. You can just say, this wasn't just the flip of a coin. This coin was going to be in his pocket for the next 2 summers, and then it meant this. And you can just transition and tell us this big search for love, for community, for connection, that's part of being a human, is now illustrated in what I'm doing with this character. The themes are not 2,700. There's probably 4 or 5 really major things that we fight for, and you just want to know what yours is, which is what we're coming to. Question in the back? Yes, go ahead. I was asked once you take the bite of food, so I used to be a waiter. Yeah.
Nonfiction, are you gonna go through that also?
Nonfiction? Yeah, most of my background is in nonfiction. And in my book, I tell a story, I expose a principle, and then I give you tools. So it's all about that. The stories look a lot like they come out of fiction because I think the same things apply. You need to give the reader something they can root for right away. And we're all wrestling with justice, injustice, and looking for love all the time.
Mine is about freedom and independence.
Very good. You know it, see, right away. It's a nonfiction work, but you still know the story you're telling. When I was 8 years old, we used to walk down this little street because the bus picked us up at the bottom of the street, and all the kids in the neighborhood got out of our houses about the same time and went down the street together. We're all about this tall. And the moms would stand on the porch and yell stuff to their kids, which told you a lot about their parenting techniques. Jill's mom would yell, "Don't forget your lunch money," because she always gave her a little bit of extra money. And then Billy's mom would yell, "Be sure to come home with your homework." And my mom yelled, "You're only as sick as your secrets." No kidding. So when it comes to characters, I can't actually drop my mom into fiction because no one would believe it. It's too much. It's like this "are you kidding me" person who brings her own weather system. So I just take little bits that she says and put them into a character. Otherwise people would say, "Time out, what is this?" But that's just how big a person my mom is. And she always, no filter, would just say whatever came to mind. When you're around somebody like that, you need to be quiet and just write it down. She's in skilled nursing now, and we go 4 times a week to see her, and there's a book, and we write down everything she says. I'm on my 3rd book of Nancy, because she's that quotable. And you have people in your life that are that quotable, but you're struggling at lunch to get in your story. You're a writer, you're supposed to be a sponge. Forget about your story for a minute. Absorb the stories around you. Ask somebody what it was like when they did blank. You find out someone was a vet and they saw action. What was that like? When you were 22 and you're on an aircraft carrier. All you have to say, what was that like? Not everybody's verbose, but somebody will at least give you an answer, and then you can repeat part of what they gave you, and they'll feel permission to give you more. We need to be better sponges of the stories all around us. I sit in coffee shops sometimes and listen to conversation. And one of the pieces I wrote last year for the stage has a line in it. This guy said to his girlfriend, I don't steal things. I just find them before they're lost. And so I was like, that is gold. That was worth the cup of coffee just to write that down and put it in a piece. And then the guy, when I wrote it in, the guy's daughter grows up and she says, I don't lie, I just say things before they happen. So that was her take on it. And there was just this whole family that lied and stole from everybody. Okay, characters are often a reader's favorite part of the story. If you have readers and they meet you, they expect you to be like their favorite character. You ever experienced this? Where they want to talk to you and they really want to talk to your character. They have more invested in the character than anything else. I want you to see your characters as whole people, not just on the page. And this is from my theater background. I apologize if this offends you. It's too theatrical. But I recommend, I go to INTAF every year and teach kids how to act and how to write for the stage. And I tell them the same thing every year. You've been given a role. I want you to go to Starbucks or go to a coffee shop with your character and buy them coffee. And they all look at me just like you're looking at me, and they're like, so there's 2 cups of coffee and I'm sitting at a table like a crazy person? I said, yes. But halfway through the conversation, you get up and change seats so you can talk for the other side. And this is what I'm telling you to do. Make an investment in character development that is more than just, oh yeah, you're my bad guy. Or no, you're the love interest, or you're the comic relief. Make an investment as a real person. Go to a party and say, you know who you really need to meet is Betsy. And they say, well, who's Betsy? And you talk about your character for 15 minutes. Because you are that much in love with everything about them. Betsy's a little confused, and ever since she got over her cocaine addiction, she has a completely different relationship with her son. It's kind of magical. They can kind of finish each other's sentences. And you know, which is good because he's in rehab. And you just tell the story. It just folds out of you. Or what would Betsy say in this situation? How would she fight with her mom about who's going to be in charge of her future? Make an investment. I think if I brought your characters in here, and that would be a really interesting thing, you know, like I was at a class with an author. He was a published author, and he writes in fantasy. In his book launch, he had 3 or 4 main characters that he hired actors to dress up as them at his book launch. Imagine 1 or 2 of your characters and whatever you're writing actually dressed the part, and they come in here and you get to interview them. I don't know what you would ask, but I'll tell you what they would say. I want to be a more whole person. I want more. I don't want you to take a shortcut to me. I want you to create a backstory. Even if it doesn't go in the book, I want you to create a backstory. I want to know what I'm fighting for and what horrible thing happens if I don't get what I'm fighting for. Even though as a writer, you know that maybe the worst thing that you could do is let that person get what they're fighting for. The tension is a big part of your story, and they're going to continue to fight, but some bad stuff is going to happen when they don't get what they want, when they don't get what they're fighting for. That conflict is everything. I wrote a story, and I bumped into somebody who heard me speak 10 years ago. I'll tell you the story, and then I'll tell you what they said. Charlie and Sue are on the edge of divorce, and to the point where Charlie has packed his bag. You know, that bag packing you do, not because you're going on a trip, but you're going to a period. So in his master bedroom, Charlie's bag is packed and on his bed, on their bed. And their daughter Zoe is 6 and needs to learn to ride a bike without training wheels. It's time. So Charlie is in front of the house, talking her through it. And Sue wanders out and stands on the porch to watch this exchange. And he says, Zoe, what you need to do is, I'm going to push you, and then I want you to keep pedaling. No matter what happens, keep pedaling. And they try it once or twice, and Zoe falls, and she's crying and feels a little betrayed. He says, really, I mean it. Your dad is not telling you anything that's not true. You need to keep pedaling. Just keep pedaling. He raises his voice a little bit, excited. And Zoe decides that she better keep pedaling. So Charlie pushes the bike one last time, and she's getting further and further away. She pedals, and Charlie is yelling in complete excitement, "That's it, Zoe! Just keep pedaling! Just keep pedaling!" And he slowly turns, and he sees Sue's face. And he goes in and unpacks his bag. Last year was 33 years for them. So this reader came up to me and she said, 10 years ago I heard you speak about Zoe and Sue and Charlie. And there have been several times in the last 4 years when I have had to keep pedaling. Thank you. You guys, what we do when we put it out there is that a lot of people will grab a story they need. You have no idea what they need, but just throw it out there with as much roundness as you can, with as much at stake as you can. Just a quick poll. What color is Zoe's hair, anyone? Anyone? Blue? Okay. Yeah.
Curly brown.
Okay. Yeah.
Right with a ponytail.
Yep. All correct answers.
Anything you need it to be.
Right. Well, the thing is, Zoe's at stake. That's the deal, right? Zoe's at stake. It's not just whether or not she can ride with training wheels. It's whether he's going to be there for her 8th birthday. Something's at stake that drives character development. When you fall flat in character development, there is not enough conflict. And you don't have to have a nuclear blast. Sometimes it's just a small bit of control that they either need to release or regain. Sometimes there's something they're fighting for, and you're not letting them fight because you're busy thinking about the big train wreck that's going to happen in chapter 7. Allow the conflicts that lead to the big part of your arc. Allow those little conflicts. Allow those moments where somebody has just blocked them and they're frustrated. And by the way, when it comes to that kind of writing, and you think you've got a big, full, round character, I'm going to tell you to just keep pedaling. Add more. Keep at it. A lot of editors say to me, well, I like this, but I want more. I've never had anybody say, you know what, this character is too big and recognizable and relatable. No, you don't hear that, right? The publisher's not going to tell you, could you not be so relatable, so much a person I've met 27 times? You know what the other question about the story is? It's not just Zoe's hair. What color's the suitcase? Right? Because it's on the bed and it's already packed. Maybe it's an old brown one with the, those straps that used to go around. All right, I want you to take your characters out for coffee. I want you to buy them coffee. Maybe if you live in a really small town, that may make you feel a little crazy. You'll get away with it way better in Spokane than we would in Coeur d'Alene. Everybody knows you in Coeur d'Alene. But I think it's a good experiment. I write in my kitchen, at the kitchen table, and so the family kind of clears out, except my son kind of boomerang back and lives in our basement. And every once in a while, a couple of my characters are fighting because, why did you make her funny? I'm funnier. And it's going back and forth. And I'm having this fight with them out loud. And Noah will come up to get something out of the refrigerator because he doesn't have his own refrigerator. He's 23. Why would he ever do that? And so he just opens the refrigerator because he likes to cool the house down that way, and then looks over at me, and I'm having this back and forth conversation. And I make eye contact with him, and he goes, I won't say a word. And he goes back down. That's what he does. He's like, Dad's crazy, and that's just the way it is. But if I go to a party and I say, I want to introduce you to Sydney. Sydney is this young woman who married a much older guy. They live on the golf course, and she comes out every day in the summer and sunbathes on this deck that overlooks the 7th fairway in almost no clothes. Just seeing if she can get a golfer to wave at her. And the whole piece, which is a piece for the stage, happens when Brad, her husband, opens the sliding glass door and says, Sid, you coming in? And they have a fight about what it means that she's throwing herself out to get a hungry look from a golfer. Sometimes you will happen on a little bit of conflict or a little bit of dialogue. Recognize this is hooking me, it will hook a reader. Okay? And that's where you really need to be a sponge. If you let Sydney talk, she will give Brad a hugely bad time for everybody he flirts with. She has a bone to pick, and the stakes are high. They're really high for her because she was the younger woman he dumped his wife for, and now she's being dumped for a younger, she sees the pattern. Your reader is always rooting for someone or something. Recognize this and be super intentional about what you give them to root for. Learn to up the stakes by just paying attention to your own feelings as you write. When you shock yourself a little bit and go, oh, I can't write that. Write it anyway. You can go back and edit, but write it anyway. Go ahead and write the shocking thing that you think, that's too much. But just do a little aside. It's not that difficult to cut and paste it or just cut it later. Go ahead and write it. I've had a lot of characters who I thought were the villain who became the hero of the piece, and it changed everything. But you have to listen. If you get kind of complex about this, you've got another writer that will do this with you. If you were to read a piece together where there is some dialogue, and then spend a few minutes over coffee talking as the characters. If you've got somebody with a little imagination that will do that with you, you start to kind of get the feel of the voice. And you say, yeah, that's sort of like it, but they never will. It's the old line from Eeyore that in one line tells you who Eeyore is and everything about him. He says, it's not much of a tale, but I'm kind of attached to it, right? That's Eeyore. And an Eeyore personality is like, well, I'm not that impressive, but that's who I am, right? As opposed to a Tigger personality who's bouncing all over the room. Sometimes it's that clear, but a lot of times it's really subtle. I wrote a piece once between two women who were 7th graders together. They bump into each other when they're 23. One of them is about to get married and the other is homeless. And they realize that they sat right next to each other in Mrs. Carlson's class. And there's this feeling of like, wow, we're really, really different. And the homeless girl tells her story about abuse and kind of being shuttled from home to home. And the girl who's about to get married has always felt like if you're a good person, you ask questions. And then you wait and let people talk. So she is trapped. Because every time she asks a question, Hannah just lets her have it. And so they're trapped together in this scene, and it's not working. Chloe asks questions and gets brutalized every time she does. So she doesn't actually know what to do, because a good person, a nice person, a kind girl asks questions. That's her mode. And I spent a lot of time when that character first came out of my head interviewing Chloe about why she did what she did. So I was clear on it. When I direct a piece, it's really easy to say to somebody, you think you're going to solve this with questions. And that's how Hannah gets to you every time. Okay. I mentioned that the hero is just the villain trapped in the wrong story. I'm going to give you a non-fiction example of character development that I use in the opening of my book, okay? I'll just read this to you. In Hans Christian Andersen's tale, The Emperor's New Clothes, a vain king gets fooled by some con men. These guys claim to make special clothing, which is invisible to anyone who happens to be stupid or unfit for their job. Instead of facing the naked truth, he's been fooled. The king loses sight of what's real and ends up quite nude in front of everyone, an embarrassing price to pay for vanity, and a likely change in how His Majesty was viewed by his subjects from then on. I love this story because I think we're all naked kings and con artists. We throw parades in our own honor and live with secret doubt. We delight in the exposure of others while ignoring the chilly breeze that signals our own vulnerability. Most of us can recall the first time we felt that first brush of surprisingly cold air, that experience of discovering the gap between with you, how we'd like to be perceived. The great news is that you can grow and become more exceptional as a leader and a person. There's really only two things that stand in your way, you and others. That's it. Only two obstacles to overcome, and you're home free. This book provides insight into both of your challenges. So it's really telling a story and then saying, this story's like us. We are this thing. We see the metaphor. We are the plumber that probably should wear a longer t-shirt. We are the one who is exposing too much of themselves. We're the one in a secret and pretty spiteful fight for revenge over an old slight. We are driven by conflict. And your character has to know what they're fighting for, but I think it's just as important for you as a writer to know what you're fighting for. Does anybody know what they're fighting for? Like, personally. Anybody? Go ahead.
Freedom of people with disabilities, including Alzheimer's.
Cool.
And dementia.
Right, okay. Someone else?
Clarity.
Clarity. Why?
And what?
And reflection.
Okay.
Over life. And the meaning of all of it.
To beat back confusion?
No. Understanding.
Okay, all right. There's something big. What's it all for? And you're attacking that? Okay. Way to go with the big goal. That's great.
It's a lifetime.
Yeah, I am gonna make sense of this, right? I'm gonna, at some point, I'm gonna navigate based on what I figure out. Cool. I'm fighting for love. Absolutely, 100% love. My oldest daughter's an actress, and she said, you know, all your pieces, Dad, are about the search for love. Every stinking one of them. I said, you had to say stinking? She goes, I'm just trying to make a point. You are about love. And I said, you're right. Guilty as charged. And if you are for something, if you're for freedom, slavery matters to you. If you're for clarity, confusion is an enemy. It's an arch enemy. If you're about love, abandonment and isolation are your enemies. Yes?
The theme in my books usually is choices have consequences.
Okay.
But my personal goal would be integrity.
Tell me why choices have consequences is so important to you.
I just think everybody needs to understand that the things that they do affects their world and everyone around them.
So to you, a villain is someone who gets away with it?
Yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah. That would create an injustice that just gnaws at you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And you guys just take the dark side of what you're for and build that into conflict and build that into the mindset of your villains. Because you're going to attack them, you're going to feel the injustice, and the tension will come into the writing, and that's really important. Because there are things that I've gone through and things that you guys have gone through, they're different, and so our interpretation of the world is different. Like how we trust other people basically our trust has been violated in certain ways, and so we kind of nurture that, we hang on to that. I think Robin Williams said once, everything that anybody's afraid of has already happened to them. That idea that we hold it in our imagination because it's already happened. Questions about enlivening your character development? Let's go. Anybody? Taking this home and you guys getting to work on character. Yeah.
Could you talk to the idea about how much people ought to read if they want to write in a genre? I work with a lot of writers who want me to help them figure out what genre they're writing in, and I talk to them about what do you read, and that, well, they don't read much. And my attitude is, you have to, I'm like Stephen King. If you don't have time to read, you can't write.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I think the problem is one step further back, which is, are you curious? Are you curious to know new things? Because somebody that says, I don't want to read, I'm just going to write, is just dipping their toe in the whole process. And to be really curious about story making, I would actually take that person and say, tell me about your story. What's your name?
Linda.
Linda, why are you called Linda? How'd you get your name?
An actress, Linda Darnell, my parents.
What kind of actress?
Movie actress.
I know, but I mean, good. What's she in?
I don't know what she was in. I've never researched it. I just knew that's why I was named Linda.
Did they ever tell you what they liked about it?
No, they were gone when I was young.
Turner Classic Movies, you might just want to look up the actress.
Used to be able to do that. Now they've mucked up on Xfinity and put it in with something that I don't want sports, so I can't get it anymore.
Yeah.
But I know of her. She was second level,
Right.
usually the main character. She was very dark, black hair.
Okay.
Very good, so.
You're striking, probably. Okay. So the thing is, we've all lost something, we've all loved something, and you want to get to that level with that writer who says, I just want to write because they have another idea about why they want to write. They want to call themselves a writer. For some people, that's important. They like the sound of that coming out of their mouth. But the real thing here is to be curious, to remain curious, to keep learning. And somebody that refuses completely to read, I don't know what to do with. You know, I understand what your frustration is, but their characters are going to sound like things that, ironically, are already existent in story. Because instead of giving us their cinematography and their character development, they've got a memory of the last thing they read or saw, and they're going to kind of pull from that. The real rich imagination is going to go, I want to write a piece about this group because something happens and we all get quarantined in here for 4 weeks, right? And we become kind of a sitcom about how we deal with each other. And some of you really regret the fries, or whatever it is. There are certain things that fold out of that because we just created an emergency situation with the group that we have right now. The cool thing is to stay curious, to take your characters for a moment and put them in a broken elevator and see what happens. Or put them on a bus going somewhere and see what happens. Play with it. And you only play with it if you're curious. I don't have a cure for non-curiosity. People that say, I'm just too cool for school, I think the world is full of wonder, and writers should be full of wonder too. It should drive us. Go ahead.
I have an idea. Books on paper.
Audiobooks, yeah, that's another possibility. And some people who don't want to read have trouble reading. So that's a real thing too, but that's a great suggestion. Other questions about or applying this in terms of what I'm talking about for looking at your characters as whole people, not just on a page. Yes?
Well, this is just a question. When I write my characters, it's like they're a conglomerate of a lot of different people that I've met in my life, and I pick and choose which things I want to put into this particular character.
Sure.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Kind of?
But I'm saying we stop, the whole stone soup story where everybody in the village brings their thing and then all of a sudden there's this amazing soup. We get the stone in the soup and that's it. We're like, got it, okay, yep, this is a hero, this is a villain. We stop way short. And the reader's looking for all of the different ingredients. They want to taste it all.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying I think it takes discipline to just keep pushing, especially with a character you already like. keep giving them motivation, keep giving them trouble, keep giving them character. Yes?
Yeah, I throw one.
There are list questionnaires online that you can interview your character with. And I've done that, I've done 3 or 4 different interviews with my characters. And there are questions that have nothing to do with your book at all sometimes, but you find out what their answers are by asking them all these questions. So
Yep.
it's useful to go look for those, just Google them, questionnaires for your characters.
Very cool. Yeah, I agree. When you have dialogue, I recommend you read it out loud to a handful of people that pay attention to dialogue and how story making moves forward with dialogue and character development happens with dialogue too. It's very often the case where somebody gets to writing and there's an answer to everything. It's back and forth between 2 characters, and the distance between the 2 gets completely blurred. And now it's just like, okay, it's exposition about the story, but they're no longer characters. And usually they've stopped fighting for something too. I think what you want to start with is the conflict. I just wrote a short piece for a high school or college competition, and it's a lady walking into a space and the other person says, "You can't stay." And she says, "I'll just be 2 days." And her friend says, "No, I mean it." And there's this huge history between them and no trust. And so from the moment that she says that, "You can't stay," there's a fight. And so you always know somebody's fighting for safety, somebody else is fighting to be able to stay safe and have sanctuary in this person's house, but they've lied so many times they've lost that privilege. So there's this trust thing. And so remember, you just want to push it in the direction of conflict because that's really what makes things happen for you. The other thing I would recommend about character development is your own conflicts can be translated into what you're writing. A lot of people keep a huge distance, and I've had a significant amount of loss in the last year and have blended that into a ton of different scenes, and it's a coping mechanism for me. I just think it's the way you want to deal with it. Sometimes something happens to you and you have to decide how the rest of your life is going to be based on a big event, and when you have those moments, you should be journaling, you should be capturing those feelings, because your character, when they run into that kind of feeling, should also be struggling, right? Let us see you struggle. Okay, a couple of quick notes about process, and then we're going to be done. I'm going to recommend that you design the way you write with your goal in mind. Do you have a goal about publishing? Do you have a goal about publishing multiple books? Do you have a goal about a particular kind of reader that you're trying to reach? Your structure for your process for writing should match that goal. A lot of people that I know that write are like James Bond. They show up, they are the one who can defeat the guy in the stairwell and then go gamble and then give the bartender some instructions about the drink they want. And they do this with kind of like not really being fazed by any one of these roles. The challenge with that is if you're that busy and if you're spread out that thin, your writing suffers from it. You're living out a lot of drama, but you're not capturing a lot of it. And if your life is completely focused on emergencies, then you're going to have a tough time structuring your world so that you can produce. Characters and plot and story need time to kind of simmer and become something. And I'm going to recommend that you write it bad and keep moving. That's kind of one of my other points is just, if those of you that are editing as you go, raise your hand if you've ever written and then edited and rewritten the same page over, say, a 2-week period. Right? Guess what? There is no second page. That's the problem. And you're actually doing it in a way that guarantees there will never be a second page. What you want to do, because you won't get to the point where, the prose is so beautiful, and there's a choir, and there's a smoke machine and stuff, and, my lead guitarist steps into your scene and says, "Be grateful." No, that's not going to happen. It's just become kind of a wheel that you're running on. Write your story. Don't worry about your commas. Keep moving. Just keep moving. Capture the story. Writing and editing are different. Most of us need help with an editor. But if you get stuck in a cul-de-sac of just over and over editing, and then you change one word and you change a comma, and you're stuck on this page, unless all you want to do is write one-page stories, you need to move ahead. You need to keep fleshing it out. Get to an arc. Get to more than is just happening here. Okay? That's a kind of a perfectionist approach, I think, that has us keep editing the same page over and over. I'm going to recommend that you have a place to write. that you write every day, and that you have a time that you write every day, that you set aside, that other things can't be involved, that your phone is turned off, that electronics are off. And unless it's just a support to your writing, it's pretty quiet. Some people like to have like a certain kind of music on, that's fine, but you should have a time and place. If you're a writer, have a time and a place that can't actually be invaded. And some of you have children, grandchildren, really aggressive pets, and so that's tough. You know, there's a place where, how do you actually, when we moved into the house in Coeur d'Alene, I said, I want an office with a door that locks. That's all I care about. You know, and she was like, Sarah was saying, well, how many bedrooms? I said, I don't care about the number of bedrooms. I want an office with a door that locks. That was it. And I got one. So, and it's useful. I found that if kids are pounding on your door, eventually the pounding goes away. Eventually the screaming stops. This is also true of bleeding. That eventually stops too. But you have to get to a place where you say, I'm doing something important and I'm investing in this. You are the conductor. If you're the writer, you're the conductor. And that means you can't spend all day fighting with the bassoons. There are parts of this process that can't take over your life. Nobody else is going to finish this if you don't. So you have to make that commitment. And sometimes you'll give too much to part of it and realize, okay, that's way more time than I can spend. I'm going to back out. I can't spend all day arguing with the bassoons. I got to get up in front of the whole orchestra and move ahead. If you process out loud, and some of you do, I'm going to recommend that you be careful about telling your story rather than writing. Some of us that process out loud, we'll find a friend and go to lunch and tell them our story, and we're repitching chapter 7, and we really should be home writing chapter 7. There's a place where talking it out gets in the way of actually getting it captured. If you've ever felt like, wow, I should really record those lunches with Sam, skip a lunch with Sam and write. See if Sam wants to read it when you're done. Maybe get a pizza and have him come over, okay? One of the questions I have about people's process, and I ask this about a lot of processes, but I think it works for a writer's process too, is would you invest a year's wages in a young writer that had your process? Would you pay somebody a whole year of what they need to make if they had your process as a writer? Would you believe that you structured your process to succeed enough that if someone else had it, you'd go, yeah, here's $50K, you work that process for a year? Most of us don't. Most of us are way more haphazard than that. Are you structured to minimize distractions and capture your story? Some days, no. Some days, yes, right? And if I could fill this room with people who are in your audience to persuade you to improve your process, I would just bring your readers in and say, how long do we have to wait? We started saying that to each other a little bit in Idaho, the Writers League meetings. It's like, okay, you're doing a lot of stuff, but are you sure you want to keep making your readers wait? And they say, what readers? I said, you know, the readers. That you have no idea what their name is, but they would love your book. Are you sure you want that to be a 2023 thing instead of a 2020 thing? In case you haven't figured this out, I like to focus on audiences and before they're the audience, and I think that can be motivation for a lot of us, okay? All right. Your readers would probably come in and say, look, it's worth the investment. Nobody has your gifts, nobody has your experience, nobody has your style, and we're waiting. They would tell you to get going. They're a gentle kick in the butt. They'd be like, we've read a lot of stuff this week, none of it's like yours. Okay, so by now, you know that I'm thinking that your audience is 100% right, and they are. The fact that you're not talking to them, that's on you. You can find your audience. You can find critique. Sometimes critique in a group like this happens. There are critique groups starting all the time. If you don't have one and you need one, start one. They're really simple rules. There's no special hat or magic ring. You bring copies. If there's 15 people, bring 15 copies of your stuff. Read us a chapter. We'll give you feedback. Okay, I just described the whole process. That's the entire process in 2 sentences. It's not that hard. The only thing you have to worry about is people that are just mean, right? Who show up and like, this is terrible, you call yourself a writer, and it's like, well, you know, you're not going to be at the next meeting if you go about it that way. There's a quote that says, watch for unloving critics and uncritical lovers. They are both liars. Watch yourself on that, because we can always find some uncritical lover, right? And I think the more dangerous is the unloving critic. The person who's not in the arena, but they want to say, your characters are garbage, your plot's like an oil spill. You know, there's that kind of feel, right? They want to come up with a great metaphor to really put you in your place. And we have enough people like that. The world is full of folks like that, and life is too short. But if you get people together who love story and love words and want to support each other, great things happen. Questions about improving your process? I know that was short, but you probably have mostly struggled in terms of the process piece yourself. Who's got a challenge you want to talk about? Anybody? Yeah. Yes.
I'm having issues with historical characters being brought into a more modern time. So changing my historical figures to a more modern setting, and say, for example, with their interactions with common people. Like, if they're from the 1600s and they came to 2025 or whatever, the dialogue interaction is what catches me when I try to write the dialogue and how they interact with each other.
So you want to study words a little bit, because there's a way that there's some words in the English language that are the same. And every once in a while, there's a word that is radically different. It means something completely different. And so you can play with that, but you need some common language to kind of get started. If not, you end up in a space where somebody's really from Pluto, right? They're going to show up from another, not just another time, but a completely other planet. And so the common thing is, I think the word for what we call beer was ale back then. And if you went into a bar and ordered a glass of ale, you would get something, right? So look for common first. What's the common stuff? What's the stuff that still translates? You know, if you're talking to somebody with a British accent and they refer to the lorry, a lot of people know that's a truck. Or Bobby, they know it's a policeman, right? So there are some things that are common enough, and you're really talking about the public domain of language and then etymology, how words get started. So you want to study that a little bit. And there are famous writers from the period, so you can look at huge amounts of writing from the 1600s. I think a guy named Bill Shakespeare wrote then too, and you might just consider that. I mean, was famous for writing, and there are lots of other contemporaries around him too, and you can read that, some of which you're going to have trouble with, but there's also going to be commonalities. So start with a scene, start with some descriptions, and don't have 5 or 6 words in a row that need to be defined. Have 1 or 2. So the points are, the conflict there is clear, but generally speaking, we can see the conversation. Yes, Colin.
I was just gonna say, I was gonna ask her if she's ever seen the movie Kate Leopold.
Yeah.
Get that movie. It's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there are several. It's a fish out of water story, right? I'm from the 1600s, and and I didn't even know 2020 existed, and what would that mean? And usually there's some kind of chivalry piece that's wildly different. Like, what does it mean to respect a woman then and now? Really different. And so it's like almost nostalgic kind of quality too. There's a lot of moments for comedy in that because of the fish out of water element. Yes, Sue?
Oh, I was thinking of Bill and Ted.
Sure.
Excellent Adventure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Another one.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, and part of the way you practice about this is you go and interview Ben Franklin.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you think, okay, what would that language be like? And would some of my stuff be impertinent? And how would that work? Right?
No, your tips are very helpful, thank you.
Okay, but I mean, you want to lock it in, and I would do it with dialogue. I would do as much as you could with dialogue, and then you just need a third person, because if I'm talking to you and you're from that era, and I'm having this conversation with you, and the phone rings, and I get to say to my friend, I have no idea what she's talking about. From what I can tell, she was part of a wine press thing, where she just walked around in a barrel and made wine. No, I mean, really, she would walk around in a barrel and made wine, and then I hang up, and the reader gets to hear this, which is part of that. So it's a triangle conversation. Yes?
There also be a show called, Steve Allen did it, called Meeting of the Minds.
Yeah.
And he put people in different centuries together at the same table.
Yes.
And that was excellent. I don't know if you can still, Meeting of the Minds, $2. I don't know if you
Yeah.
can find it anywhere, but it was great.
Yeah, I mean, and comics are tackling this all the time too. Jim Gaffigan does an interesting piece about how Jesus was a carpenter, and so then people would say, our son is blind, and we really would like to have some shelves right here. It'd be great if you could see them by Tuesday. That was his. And the fun thing about that is it just drops Jesus into modern day, and suddenly,
Hilarious.
yeah. What would a carpenter? How do you talk to a carpenter? Yes, go ahead. Yes.
It's like my grandson, he's 23, I think. Haven't seen him in a while. My husband said, do you know that gay means happy? Or did?
Right.
He's like, really?
Yeah. Yeah. And there are nuances like that where a word actually sounds like what it means now. And so you can you'll do this with language. You'll start to chart the language of dialogue and say, I can get away with a few things because tone, I don't know if you've ever seen, there are several YouTubes of actors who are talking to each other and they are not saying real words, but you can tell what's happening. They're not speaking in another language. They're saying English words, but none of the dialogue makes any sense, but by tone, they're communicating. And you're going to have some of that too. If you YouTube that, I think you'll find there's whole exchanges that can happen where somebody is obviously confronting or obviously encouraging or obviously, that kind of thing. It's all in tone. Okay, other questions about process? Anybody want to share like their hack for process? Go ahead.
Can you repeat the thing for the two groups?
Yeah, I'm saying it's a simple process. Get 6 people together and say, bring enough copies so that we can kind of pass this out, because some people actually do some visual learning and some people are auditory, and it's a combination of both. You want reader feedback from people who are listening to what you've written and who are reading it. So it seems to be like the magic combination. And a group like that just needs to be told, give us your first impression. What is it? What really stays with you? Did I lose you anywhere? What's confusing about this, if anything? And what's your favorite part about what I read? I think favorite part is what you, at a minimum, you always want to get that. What's your favorite part? Somebody else, yes, go.
For whatever reason, my writing style is that the characters tell their own stories.
Okay.
And be going along, telling their story, we'll meet another character. And when that character may be not that important, but later on I'll meet another character that has to tell their story.
Okay.
And, it all ends up coalescing.
Canterbury Tales. I would start there.
Canterbury Tales.
Have you read them? We've got 4 or 5 different people, the different tales, and they have their own perspective, and there's a feeling of, as we walk along, we're going to tell our stories. By the way, I would search after why. Tell me why this is happening. Why are you telling me this story? And the reason I'm pushing you on that is if we allow exposition that isn't really about the story or character development, it starts to sound like soap opera dialogue. Where you come in and I say, well, Brooke's baby's brother's friend, Travis, had that terrible accident. And we've been saying that phrase for 3 weeks on this show, just in case somebody missed a few episodes, because we want to know where Travis is in the universe. And that's what happens when there's exposition that isn't about, oh, now I know more about the character, or it's moved the story along. And that's why I immediately said, you need a third person you're talking to about this time travel, folk, because it doesn't have to be justified. I am telling part of the story when I complain to a friend or say something to a friend. That third person, that's the reason for being. So see if you can do that where the exposition, the telling of the story is consistent and has a logical reason for happening. Because then the reader's like, well, I just get to be in the room. Somebody pressed him about his story, and I was in the pub when he answered, and and the reader's in that position. And it's more seamless than, let me tell you about me, because that doesn't happen that often. Where you and I sit down in this restaurant, and I say, well, first I should probably give you my background, and then I tell this long story. Readers know when that exposition has taken over the story. And to be subtle about exposition is a whole art form. And the great writers do it well, where you just realize, wow, I just learned about that guy at the gas station. I wonder if he's important. And later on he is. Right? Does that make sense? I confused you, so go ahead and ask me another question.
Well, the storytelling is both in narrative and dialogue.
Okay.
So I as the storyteller, they're telling me the story, and I'm putting their story down.
Okay. There's a character who's being told this stuff. Or they're in first person, and you're capturing it in first person.
Right.
Canterbury Tales. Yeah, that's what Canterbury Tales is. They're talking in the first person, you know, the Miller's Tale, and he's going to tell this story, and we start in them with another tale. Okay.
You know, my background in reading is Lamore, Cussler, and Clancy.
Okay, all right. There are a lot of modernization stories. What's the night? Something Night, darn it. Can't think of the story. Ledger stars in it.
Oh,
Knight's
yeah.
Tale. Dark Knight.
Nice Tale.
A Knight's Story.
Yeah.
Or Knight's
It is
Tale.
Knight's Tale, and it has a
Knight's Tale.
character that is Chaucer. It's not Milton's Chaucer. And there's a character of Chaucer there who says at one point, I'm not going to be able to get revenge on you in any other way, but I'm going to eviscerate you in my stories. And that would be worth watching again, just to get sort of a primer. Other questions? I don't want to keep you longer than I'm supposed to. I usually try to be better on time. The thing I forgot to say when I got up is I totally admire the writers in the room, the people that actually get at a keyboard and capture it or a yellow pad and get it written down. You're the one group on the planet, I think, that kind of beat back fear one keystroke at a time. And it's not easy to do this. And so I appreciate the support, and we just appreciate you guys. We're sort of the neighboring group. I was going to explain also my clothing, because we dress up for Coeur d'Alene, because we meet in a funeral house, so we got to, no, it's not true. But thank you for this. Any other questions before I just release? Go back to, yes, go ahead,
Do you
Linda.
address nonfiction at all?
Well, I do, and I think actually the reader's just equally impatient to know their benefit. When you're writing nonfiction, you may not be as focused on character, but you're going to be focused on story. There's going to be a way, here's why you should know this, right? There's going to be some import to the data.
What if you're writing about people that you're waiting for them to die so they won't sue you?
Change your
Oh,
name.
please write a comedy about waiting for people to die
I'm
so they
sorry,
won't
what?
sue you. Please write a comedy about that if you're doing that.
Uh-huh.
I mean, in addition to whatever else you're writing,
Yeah.
write a comedy about people who just keep living. Their family keeps telling them, go to McDonald's, it's really healthy food, and start smoking. No,
That'd be a great play.
yeah.
But I mean, if you're writing nonfiction, there's a whole other, you have to be liable. You're liable if you
True.
scandalize someone or tell some truth about the person, and then they know who you're writing about.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
I no, totally agreed, and you know what your requirements are, but that gives you time to work the story too. There's a lot about this process that isn't just when do I publish. A lot of us have stuff that's in process that is really 18 months away if we're honest, because we've got to work it, which is plenty of time for people to perish. Just saying, it's a long way. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, just one comment. When you're writing something, you want to keep it real. Like you don't want to have a 2.5 foot dwarf carrying a 5 foot broadsword, stuff like that.
Yep.
It turns people off when they're reading.
Well, especially
Turns me off.
the first time you meet a character, if there is inconsistencies like that, you're trying to figure out what to do with that with your imagination, and you'll get a little bit of leeway from a reader, but not much.
Not much.
I agree, because I mean, I told a couple of stories and we already had like the color of hair and maybe the color of the suitcase on the bed, and we tend to lock in that way. So, yeah, things that can't work, you want to make, if there's a reason they work and you're in fantasy and you can tell us why it works because the sword retreats or retracts in some way, but yeah, I agree with you, and the more literal your reader, the more trouble they'll have. Yes, somebody else?
Eric, ever had an English teacher that talked in a straight monotone when she was reading Shakespeare?
I have, and because mirroring actually works, what happens is students start to ask their questions in a monotone. Do you think Hamlet really cares about, and then it's the same thing, it's just, and then what you want to do is try a completely squeaky voice. It's like, I don't think this is true at all. I don't know what you're saying. Just to see what happens. I think I sat on a tag. I'm sorry. And then just retreat. You're right. That's actually part of character development, though, is don't let them mirror each other. Try to keep them distinctive, even if they're related. Any of you have had kids? Did you have two that were alike? Yeah. You try to figure out what to do with the first child, and then the second one comes along, and you think, well, I'm kind of an expert. Wrong. The second one is completely different. That's not fair. But with your characters, I would take that same approach. It's like, we're going to keep you kind of separate a little bit because I can't have this homogenized thing where we all just talk the same way. We need the distinctive. We need the different. And actually, one of the challenges as a writer is you may have trouble with differences, period. You know what I mean? Like when somebody's really different from me, how do I know how to talk to them? And I have to do more listening when they're really different from me, which I have talked to a lot of writers who couldn't figure out how to finish a character because they were too different. We had one kid that was working on a mass murderer character, and I said, okay, well, talk to me about his motivation. He goes, well, I don't really know. I said, well, make one up. How does somebody end up here? And he's like, wow, that's too much work. I said, then change what they do. And he did, but his conflict with the character was, it's not enough like me. And you guys are super interesting, but your readers would get tired if it was just like you. Use your imagination and push into those other things. Particularly someone like, here's a good example this year, someone who disagrees completely with you politically. Write a character like that just for fun. Write a page about somebody who disagrees with you politically. It will shut you as a writer because you're having to handle difference, and something inside you is going, don't let him say that, or whatever it is, right? And you've got a lot of consternation about it, which is good for you as a writer. I think a lot of people try to homogenize it into one thing, and then we lose interest in that family, we lose interest in that team. The thing that really sparks it is the differences. But that comes at cost. You're gonna have to wrestle with the differences. Jim? Right. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Michael. Boy, that was a lot of excellent information. Appreciate it.